Dinner at 8ish is the 20th episode of the 5th season of Cheers. This is, of course, directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. And there are definitely some interesting things here. It's a really brilliant episode, of course. It starts off with a very, very short intro, with Norm writing a speech for Vera's Women's Auxiliary Club, and he's writing it about poise. It's fine. It's not the best intro, but it's not too bad. We then have a small subplot, and Carla is trying to find somebody to look after her kids because she has a date. It took me a second to realise that she had a date since she was dating Eddie LeBecq. But it turns out she actually had a date with her butcher because Eddie is in Vancouver. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't particularly love it. But nevertheless, she has this date. Everybody seems to have a thing. And nobody wants to watch her kids on Wednesday. Cliff keeps offering. And I will sum up this part of the narrative very briefly, then I'll go through everything else chronologically. Carla even asks Al to watch her kids. Eventually she realises she has no other options, so she lets Cliff do it. And Cliff clearly doesn't know what he's getting himself in for. Towards the end of the episode, Carla's kids actually drop Cliff off at Cheers, and by that I mean he is thrown down the stairs, wrapped up like a mummy. Obviously not a brilliant experience for Cliff. It's definitely padding. It gives us an excuse to cut back to Cheers from the main narrative. I didn't mind it. I rather liked it. I don't think Cliff did. The main narrative focuses on Frasier and Lilith, and I feel like this narrative does kind of come out of nowhere, because Frasier and Lilith have decided to announce that they have moved in together, which is great, really happy for them, but they haven't really been mentioning Lilith that much. And even, I think Diane points out that they've only known each other properly for a few months, so it does seem quite quick. But I feel like they maybe should have peppered Lilith in a little bit more so this didn't seem out of the blue. Obviously, because I watched Frasier before I watched Cheers, I was well aware of the progression of their relationship. But had I watched Cheers before watching Frasier, I feel like this would have felt a little bit out of the blue. But nevertheless, I do like it. And they decide to invite Sam and Diane over for dinner since they were very much the reason that Lilith and Frasier ended up being together anyway. And then we cut to their home, and it is beautiful. It is such a stunning property. And they're getting ready to host this dinner, and they try to make dip an amusing trigger word for some fun, slightly inappropriate at dinner time memories. And they're being very overly positive and overly supportive of each other. It's kind of uncomfortable to watch, but in a fun way. And we have some brilliant dialogue between the pair of them. It's so fantastically written. My favourite being Lilith asking Frasier, why do you insist on displaying your magazines in that insipid accordion design? Lilith tries to tidy the magazines, and because they're starting to argue, she throws the magazines at Frasier. She bounces off of the sofa and storms into the bathroom. Frasier's expression in that point is so brilliant. And then the doorbell rings, and of course it's Sam and Diane, and Frasier welcomes them in. He then uses the cheese knife to get into the bathroom, and Frasier and Lilith are arguing in the bathroom. And we then have a really delightfully awkward scene where Sam and Diane, mostly Sam, are eating the dip that they put out, and thankfully, because they'd previously tried to make dip an interesting word, that meant Lilith and Frasier could make up quite quickly. They go to the piano and start singing Our House, which is absolutely delightful, and after a couple of lines, Diane decides to go over and join them, which felt really inappropriate. But also I feel like having Frasier and Lilith singing at the piano together while they have guests, not inviting their guests over, is also very awkward. As soon as Diane starts singing, they promptly decide to cut the song off. It seems like we've turned a corner, the evening's going to go well, and then things quickly change again. Frasier and Lilith start to explain that they have a good relationship because they don't have secrets from each other, and Sam's not necessarily in agreement with this, but Diane actually says, no, it's probably a good thing. It's good that Lilith knows that she and Frasier were once engaged, and then Lilith returns to the bathroom It turns out Lilith only knew that Frasier and Diane dated, not that they were engaged. And Frasier tries to tell Lilith through the bathroom door that Diane means nothing to him, and he says, and I quote, "If I notice her at all, it's merely as an annoyance, like a bug flying around in a room." Diane, of course, is in the room at this time, and to her credit, she doesn't fly off of the handle at that description or anything. Meanwhile, Sam is just eating the food that's out on the table. Diane convinces Frasier to tell Lilith the truth, and he does. He confesses that Diane left him at the altar, and that it was obviously a difficult time for him. He tried to forget it. That's why he hasn't brought it up, which seems like a reasonable explanation. But suddenly Lilith starts to ask him a lot of questions, and he says, "I will not be grilled like a common criminal." And Frasier goes into the bathroom, and Sam, still eating the nibbles, holds the knife in the air and just says, "Cheese knife?" This is a recurring theme with this episode. We briefly cut back to Cheers, and we actually have Corinne, played by Doris Grau, who has stepped in to help out. It didn't occur to me until that moment that everybody except Woody was gone. Diane and Sam were obviously at Frasier's, and Carla has a date, leaving Woody on his own. So they brought Corinne in, which was quite nice. And we then have the moment there where Cliff is thrown down the stairs, wrapped up like a mummy. We then cut back to Frasier and Lilith, where we spend the rest of the episode. And we have some brilliant quotes. Diane explains, "Our relationship was a two-way street." Frasier replies, "Yes, and I was run over in both directions." And Diane had pointed out that they did have some fun, and Frasier insults her French syntax, and now it's Diane's turn to run to the bathroom. What I really like about the next bit is that Sam has had quite a passive role. Basically, all he's offered is the cheese knife, but he actually becomes the voice of reason. And everybody is able to get on with the evening and enjoy their dinner, and they're eating the lasagna that apparently didn't taste like lasagna. And Diane then proposes another toast about being grateful for past experiences. I think that was a really nice moment where they all had a chance to realise that, yes, they may have pasts, but it's led them to who they are and where they are now, and they're happy where they are now. So instead of agonising over the past, in a way, be thankful that it led people to where they are now, which I think is a nice sentiment. And then we get another chance to focus on Sam as Jill, the person Lilith hired to help her in the kitchen, comes out of the kitchen. She's played by Zetta Whitlow, and it turns out that she had once dated, or at least spent some time with Sam, and it's Sam's turn to say something awkward as he reassures Diane that he dated Jill when they weren't together. It was when Diane was living with Frasier, and Lilith once again runs to the bathroom because apparently Frasier had led her to believe that he'd never lived with anybody before. And I think there we do have a great message that you don't necessarily need to tell your partner everything, but it's probably best to not lie, particularly if you still spend time with your former lovers, because the truth will come out eventually. And Diane is also in the bathroom at this point, and Frasier has a plan. He decides to lock both women in the bathroom. I do have a question about why there is a key to the bathroom from the outside anyway. That is a little bit awkward, but nevertheless, he locks them both in the bathroom, and he and Sam go upstairs to watch some tapes, and it's a nice way to end things. It definitely helps to highlight that there were some overreacting, but I think we have some great messages in here as well, and some really brilliant performances, absolutely fantastic performances. It was really nice to see inside Frasier and Lilith's home, of course. I still believe that this came out of the blue, and maybe it was something that they just decided on the spur of the moment, so obviously they can't backtrack and bring Lilith into it a little bit more in the previous episodes, and that's absolutely fine if that's the case. But if this is something they'd planned from the beginning of season 5, then I definitely think Lilith should have been mentioned a little bit more frequently. But nevertheless, it's a really great episode. Dinner at 8ish has some really good moments, and it was nice to cut back to Cheers every now and then, but it was also nice to spend time in a different environment, and I love Lilith. So yes, I feel like it was random and out of the blue, but at the same time, not complaining. Love her, and this is a pretty great episode. No real complaints from me at all.